My name is Gwenne Berry. I am Assistant to the President and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Northern Iowa. It's one of those jobs, it's brand new at the institution. Well, I've been in it for just over 4 years, but there hadn't been a Chief Diversity Officer at UNI prior to them hiring me. And the position developed at a time when there was some unrest among students. They wanted to see things done a little differently. And part of what they were asking for was the appointment of a chief diversity officer, someone who would keep their arms around all of the diversity activities and events, and that's at the low level, and I can talk about that more, but also someone who would hold the institution accountable for what it should be doing for students who came from multicultural backgrounds and had different needs than the traditional student did. Someone who would look at policies to determine if there were some barriers in those policies that had not been thought about or were perhaps unseen. Someone who would hold the administrators accountable for thinking about diversity as they moved forward, and someone who would be responsible for helping the university as an institution. And when I say as an institution, I'm talking about the alums, the incoming students, and the entire campus community, which is larger than a city, if you think about it, but someone who would be responsible for keeping that institution on the straight and narrow as it turned from an institution that never thought on the day this institution opened its doors that it would educate Black, Hispanic, Asian, transgendered people with accessibility concerns. Those people were never thought about on the day that the University of Northern Iowa opened its doors. But now those people make up a good chunk of our demographic picture. So we have to turn and start to think about what their needs are. And that's what I do. And every day it looks a little different. That's the joy of the job. Every single day is a little different. One day I might be planning events because people like to see you. If I could stay in my office all day and review policies and probably never get done. You can only imagine how many policies there are governing an institution of higher ed. But people want to know who you are, and they like the opportunity to see you. They like the opportunity to talk to you. So I sit on various committees. I'm around campus. I plan a few events, but I do more collaborating with other committees, faculty members, staff members, and then external groups around town to make things happen so that diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the forefront. When we make decisions, we need to be thinking about DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And lately we throw on the word belonging because inclusion is the action I take to make you feel welcome. Belonging is the action or the way that you say, the way you feel when I'm successful at opening the doors to make you feel welcome. It's like communication, it's a two-way street. If you feel like you belong, then my attempts at inclusion were successful. So when we talk about those things, we put belonging on the end of everything.
So when we talk about, I hadn't really thought of it this way. When we talk about diversity, we're talking about more than just Black versus white. We're talking about the whole spectrum of ethnicities, but we're also talking about physical abilities too.
We think about diversity in the broadest sense. So diversity includes people who are not in the mainstream. and or who have been marginalized, oppressed, underrepresented, or made to feel less than, because ultimately it's about power and oppression. So the first thing you automatically think of is the black and the white. And that's where it stems. That's where everything grew from. But you also have to think about gender and sex, and the two are different. Gender is who I believe myself to be. Sex is what I was assigned at birth. The two may not be the same. There's sexual orientation. That's who I'm attracted to. You also have to think about accessibility. Am I able to get around the campus successfully? We think about military veterans because there can be marginalization of that population as well. We also think about people with beliefs that are not Christian because there's marginalization of that population as well. So we think about diversity in a very broad sense. And a lot of institutions will also look at political stance. They might look at size. People who are overweight can be discriminated against because of it. People who don't, the people that you don't immediately think of when you say, all American. And that's our fault because we drew a picture a long time ago about that, about what all American is supposed to look like and feel like. And when you don't fit into that picture, you get marginalized. Your needs don't count as much as other people's needs.
That was powerful. That was good. I like that.
Oh, good.
Very good. Very good. Because I think to many of us, and to be frank, to our congregation, which is overwhelmingly white
Mm-hmm.
and overwhelmingly middle class, we don't see ourselves as necessarily as being isolated from those groups that you talked about. But you're right, we don't think about those. And I think when diversity is put in front of us, or when that word is spoken to us, it can be challenging. It can be threatening to us because we don't really understand what it encompasses.
You are absolutely correct. The word diversity can be extremely frightening to people. What I like to say is that if you have been in the majority and your needs have been met all the time, then someone starts to talk about equity, it can feel a little like oppression, although it is not. It can feel like you're being marginalized, although that's not what's happening. It's simply that all of the people whose needs weren't being met before, all of the people who weren't getting equity before are now getting equity. That sometimes the camera has to be away from you and over to these other groups of people so that we can all participate. And I like to also say that it is imperative that we all have that opportunity to participate at the same level. If we don't do it, we are coming up on a time, wow, we are able to double our knowledge. I can't remember, but when we get to the point that we're able to double our knowledge every few months or so, that's when it's going to be imperative that everybody have that opportunity for equity, because you will almost intentionally build an underclass if you don't let everybody play equally. You build an underclass, and an underclass does not pay into your tax base. An underclass is not part of your economic machine, and they need to be taken care of. They pull from the tax base. They pull from the economic machine, and we aren't the community that we say we want to be when we have built an underclass. Everyone should have that opportunity to give and put into the machine. Studies would indicate that when you give people a job, and this is shown repeatedly, particularly among Black men, because the myth is that Black men are violent. They're just naturally violent. But research indicates that when Black men are given jobs or the opportunity to compete for jobs, the crime rate goes down. It goes down tremendously. But you cannot have people feeling as if the system doesn't value them. When the system doesn't value them, they don't value the system. And then the only way they get to play is to bring injury to that system. And we've already shown that we don't like the way that people have chosen to bring injury to our system. Sometimes people like to say, the system is broken and we've got to fix it. The system isn't broken at all. The system is doing exactly what it was supposed to do in the first place. It was supposed to keep certain people out. And I don't always talk about it keeping out people of color. It keeps out women. It is set up so that when women achieve to a certain point, that's it. It becomes a different game for her if she wants to go any further. When Black people want to achieve any more than a certain level, it becomes a different game for them to play. And suddenly all the cards are against them. The system isn't broken. It's doing what it's supposed to do. We have to either stop using that system and build a new one that's equitable, or we do have to bring enough injury to this current system that it starts to serve everyone. And when you talk about that level of change, you are really talking about scaring people. When you talk about demographics changing, the demographics in this state are changing, and they are changing faster than we thought they were going to change. You think about the fact that in less than about 12 years, there will be 12 states in the United States, not 12 cities, but 12 states that will be majority minority. That means whites won't be the majority in those states. Those states include California, New York, Georgia, Texas. Los Angeles has been whites have been the minority in Los Angeles since 1990. If you look at a map of the browning of America, you can see it happening just about every decade. There's a whole new chunk of America starting at the tip of Texas and moving up, that we're getting browner and browner and browner. And we cannot afford to simply say, we don't care about the needs of those brown people. Those Black people don't get to play. And I find it interesting that often in the 4 years that I've been doing this job, I can talk about the demographics of the country or of the state, and I can turn around and look at my audience and I will see horror on their faces. But if I talk about the needs of women, oh, well, that makes sense. We can get into that. But when you start to talk about integrating Black and brown people into the system, letting them play equally, a Black person might be your boss, a brown person living next to you and your property values don't go down. That's not a world that we are used to living in. And it is incredibly uncomfortable. And I don't mean to poo-poo it. I'm firm about it because I recognize it. I'm not poo-pooing the feelings of people who are afraid of the change. But I am saying we don't have a whole lot of time for that anymore. We don't have a lot of time to play with what's known as a racial equity detour, or a way around the conversation of race. Race is different than diversity. Diversity it just means difference. And diversity, as I said, we think of that very broadly. race is about those Black and brown people, we don't have a whole lot of time to say that these Black and brown people don't get to play anymore. We just don't. But the racial equity detour around that, it simply means a way around the conversation. So when I want to talk about race, when I come to the table and I say, we've got to change some policies because I'm finding that our Latinx men are not performing at the same level as our white females. And we want everybody to perform at the same level or to be able to perform at the same level. But something is going wrong over here. So based on what I've looked at, we've got to make some changes here. And people start to say things like, well, let's slow down. First, we need buy-in. I wouldn't want to offend white men, or I wouldn't want our donors to hear about this and be concerned about what we're doing. And what we're doing is catering to the people who are already performing well, to the people who already have the power. And now we're not talking about race and equity anymore. What we're talking about is keeping people comfortable over here. And these people don't have to be kept comfortable, but we're so used to doing it that we continue to do it. So instead of making change for the people who haven't been able to, because we're not clear, it could be a policy that we have and we haven't recognized a piece of the policy actually puts up a barrier instead of taking barriers down. It could be that we are making some assumptions about the culture of that particular population, and we say things like, well, their culture doesn't value education. That's not true. What culture wouldn't value education in whatever form it comes? Maybe the way they value it doesn't look like what you do, but they certainly value education. Nobody has babies and just leaves them to fend for themselves. They educate their children and they want the best for their children. They just may not do it the same way you do. But we find ways to talk about keeping other people comfortable. The people who already have the power, who already have the money, who are already in a position to continue oppressing, we got to keep them comfortable. So we start to say those things like, well, let's slow down. Let's not go too fast. Let's make sure that we've got total buy-in. And we have to know how to get around those sorts of detours. We have to be ready for them because they're coming. You have very likely sat in conversations where someone came to the table and said, we need to change this. And right away, someone in that room said, let's make sure we have buy-in. Let's slow down and check with. The legislators might, the donors could. And then we're not talking about getting to where we need to get anymore. And we don't have time to do that. We got to start naming our problems, recognize them, name them, talk about them, and get past them. But if we don't recognize and name them, and those are two things, I think Iowans perhaps we are better skilled than anybody at not naming a thing and not talking about it, but then taking copious notes that make it look like we talked about it. We are skilled at doing that. I'm a native Iowan. I know how skilled we can be at doing that when a subject makes us uncomfortable. We do things like say, I know what let's do. Let's celebrate diversity. We are going to celebrate diversity, and we are going to bring in 10 Black people, and we're going to bring in 10 Hispanic people, and they're going to sit at this table and tell us all about what it's like to be Black or Hispanic in Iowa. That's what, and we feel good about that. We feel warm. We feel like we have really made some strides. But what you're doing is, in fact, celebrating diversity. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating diversity. It's just the lowest possible form of moving the needle that there is. It's very easy to celebrate something. You don't even have to engage. You don't have to invest. And this is yet another racial equity detour. You don't have to invest. What do I have to change to celebrate diversity? Nothing. I can sit there and listen to you talk. I can listen to your testimony and I can clap and I can feel warm because, first of all, I came out to this thing. And second of all, I am still awake and I'm paying attention and I've remembered most of the names of the people up there. And gosh, isn't it just awful over there on the east side of Waterloo? And then I go home. I celebrated diversity. I'm good for the year. I've checked the box. I didn't have to invest and I didn't have to change. It's almost like driving past a car accident. You look at it, but you didn't have to get out of your car and get somebody out of the wreck. You didn't have to give anybody mouth to mouth. So you're not investing. Celebrating diversity is an okay thing to do, but it's not the thing to do. It's not how we will move the needle in this community. 2 years ago, we were named the worst place in the United States of America to be Black. Now you think about that for a second. The United States has 50 states. And we were the worst? Not our state, but our town. Our little old Waterloo Cedar Falls was by far the worst in the United States. We were worse than Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, all those places that you like to think of as being, oh, they're much worse than we are. Us. And we.
My reaction when I first heard that was something's wrong with the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be right.
And that's what everybody said. Everyone said something must be wrong with the numbers. And it took us a little while to get past that. That was almost a detour that we made up ourselves, a racial equity detour we made up ourselves. We wanted to talk about there must be something wrong with the numbers. The numbers might have been a little old, a year or two old. They may not have been exact. Maybe it wasn't 19.6, but it was 19.1. But what was important is that there were enormous disparities between the way Black people were living in Waterloo and Cedar Falls and the way white people were living in Waterloo and Cedar Falls. And we had been living with those disparities for a very long time and being okay with it. When it got served up and put in our faces, it said a lot. If you flipped it over, in fact, you could read that as Waterloo Cedar Falls may be the most racist place to live if you are Black in the United States. And we fought on the side of the North. Well, we weren't a state yet, but think about that. It wasn't a state or a city in the South. It was us. That made a lot of people open their eyes and say, whoa. And for whatever reason, a lot of people wanted off that list. I don't know if it was guilt, embarrassment, or honest to goodness, my eyes have been opened and I want to see things change. I didn't know these things were happening. I admit I find it difficult to believe that people did not know about some of those disparities. It was just easier to ignore them and to say they have nothing to do with me. But they do. They have something to do with all of us. Like I said, it's back to that building an underclass. Let's don't do that. Let's first agree we're not going to do that. Not to our immigrant populations, not to people who've lived here for a long time, who are natives, not to our neighbors, and not to ourselves. Let's don't do that. Let's uplift one another. And one of the things that happened right away when those numbers were released were that friends of mine called and said, these are white people, Gwen, what should I be doing? As a white person, what should I be doing to fix this? And I have one answer for that. White people have to talk to white people, and this is hard. I know it is. White people have to talk to white people. I call myself the diversity mosquito because everybody expects me to say discrimination is wrong. I almost sound like Charlie Brown's teacher because you so much expect it to come out of my mouth. You expect other Black people to say discrimination is wrong, and it's because they're affected by it. But white people have to tell other white people, look, I know you don't make loans to Black people. I see what you're doing. I know that you charge higher interest rates to Black people who, ironically, are the ones who can't afford it. I know what you're doing. I know that you teach your daughters that there is something wrong with having Black friends, particularly if they are males. Everyone thinks that they've never said the N word, so they're not a racist. We can do better than not being a racist, first of all. Let's be anti-racist. And you don't have to have ever said the N word to be a racist. If you've participated in any way, shape, form, or fashion in activities that have kept people of color down, that have kept people of color from competing at the same level, you're racist. And you have to see it, recognize it, name it, and own it, and then talk about it. But it's hard, it's change, and it hurts because we've thought of ourselves as great people. We are really good people. We live in Iowa. We are good people. We don't like to think of ourselves as having done something terrible. But white people first have to talk to their white friends and say, I see what you're doing. I know what you're doing. I know what you're teaching. I know what you're failing to do, because it can be an act or it can be failing to act. I know that you as a teacher don't pay any attention to your Black students. I'm calling you on it. I see it. That's the first step. And white people have to get comfortable with that so that it isn't in the dark anymore. It isn't a secret anymore. Because as a Black person, I am not in the room when everybody in the room is white and it's comfortable to start saying certain things. I have no idea who in that room uses the N-word, makes racist jokes, or talks about the fact that they know Black people are intellectually inferior, but they'll go out in public and say all the politically correct things. I don't know who those people are, but you probably do. So you have to call them on it. That's the first thing. And the next thing that you can do is take actual action. And this is the part where, wow, you have to do some work on yourself. My daughter has a little girl, and this is me owning this, naming it, owning it, and calling it out. I am petty and vain. I will not be a grandma. My daughter has a daughter. Her name is Bryn, and she is the most wonderful, beautiful, amazing person I've ever met. And Bryn is biracial and thinks that when we say, well, what color are you? She thinks we're talking about her shirt. So we're letting that fly for now, but we're going to have to talk about some things. But we know that when we take Bryn to the playground, Bryn plays with everybody. She wants to race everybody. She wants to grab and hold hands with everybody and run with them. and challenge them. And I can get across faster than you can, or I can jump higher than you can. Bryn wants to play with everybody. And for the most part, everybody wants to play with Bryn because kids haven't learned racism yet. When you put children in a room, they will usually be okay, unless you've started to teach them certain things. My daughter was in 4th grade when she came home and was very upset because another girl in her class, a white girl, said, "You know, if we were here 200 years ago, you would have been my slave." She didn't come up with that on her own. What conversation has she been having that she would say something like that to another child that she believed to have been her friend? We teach our children racism. We do it via our words, our actions, and sometimes by what we don't do. But there's a book we're reading in the community called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And when I was talking about it's not good enough to just not be racist, let's be anti-racist. And anti means against. Let's go against it openly, vocally, strongly, confidently. Let's be anti-racist. And the book was chosen in kind of a strange set of events. Every year we have a diversity book read at the University of Northern Iowa. We do that in the fall. And I decided that every other year we would focus on race as the form of diversity, which feels lopsided, but research shows that the first thing another person notices about you as you approach them is your race or the color of your skin. It's the first thing they notice. And that within 5 seconds of noticing that, they've made some decisions about you based on that information. So if that's the first thing they notice, we better work on it. So I figured every other year we'll talk about race. In the intervening years, we will talk about other forms of diversity. So we have talked about sexual orientation and gender in between time. And so we did race the first year, then we did sexual orientation and gender the second year. The third year, we did race again. And this year, it was time to do something else. And I'd been pondering what that would be and thought I had made up my mind what area we would focus on. And then summer 22 came in. We already know that 2020, the whole year, 2020, seems to have been baked in hell and then handed to us. It's been a year. A lot has happened. Summer 22 came in, and it came in hot. And George Floyd was murdered in front of us. And I won't make any remarks about who was wrong, but seeing someone killed is not a sight that most of us can say we've witnessed before. So we watched that over and over and over again. And I will never forget sitting at the table, working because of COVID, working at home. And I knew what had happened because I had the news on most of the day. So I knew what had happened. My husband came home. And he didn't know, and I didn't, for whatever reason, caught up in my work, didn't say anything to him. He went into the bedroom and he turned the television on and he's getting settled. And I can hear him from down the hall screaming, "Get off of his neck. You're going to kill him. Get off his neck. Get off his neck." Because he didn't know what was going to happen. And I put my head down on my keyboard because there wasn't anything else to do. I knew what was going to happen. And my husband, as a Black man who has been stopped 2 blocks from his home, jogging, because someone called in a suspicious Black man in the neighborhood. And he's called me on the phone, and I've listened while he talked to an officer. And I will say this did not happen in Iowa. And I've listened while he tried to talk to an officer who just wasn't quite buying that he was in his own neighborhood, and had that feeling in my chest, wondering, is this going to go okay? Is this going to go okay? Is this going to go okay? So now that man is watching this happen. And if that wasn't bad enough, there was Ahmaud Arbery. That tape surfaced. And there was Breonna Taylor just a couple months before all of that. And every time we thought it was done, there would be something else. And there were protests. And that's what America does well. America protests. We were founded on protest. I'm not mad at anyone for protesting. But I was watching my country, and I wasn't real sure where I was. And I said, we're going to have to talk about race again. We absolutely have to talk about race. And we got to do more than talk about it. We're going to have to do. We're going to have to learn, and we're going to have to do. So I started looking for books, and this one became the obvious book. It's got the 2 things I was looking for. It educates, but then it puts you right in position to do, and it tells you what to do. There's a workbook that goes along with it that allows you to do all of the personal work that is necessary to do when you are figuring out, what have I been taught about other people? I mean, I don't sit here as if everything about me is absolutely perfect, and I've not been taught any bad messages, because I have. Black people, as a group of people, we tend to be somewhat conservative. So my father was not all about gay people at all. And when I say that, I mean not in our yard, not on my teen line, not as my friends. I was taught some things. And doing the work to undo it is important. You got to see it. You got to name it. You got to talk about it. Own it. You got to own that there are parts of you that are messed up. It's almost like therapy, only less fun. That's what this book does. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi is the community read. It turned into a community read. It was the diversity read at UNI, and 2 wonderful women, Kathy Young and Sharon Juwan, came to me as friends after George Floyd, saying to me, first, Gwen, how are you and John doing? And I started crying right away, because it was so wonderful that someone knew to just say, are you doing okay? For someone recognizing what that had done, what the trauma might be like. And as a note, racial trauma, the trauma around racism, around being discriminated against for so long, is similar to PTSD and can actually have physical effects that include depression and physical pain. But they recognized, if nothing else, that this could not be a good time for Gwen and her husband. So we've got this book. They called me. They wanted to know, second, what can we do? We got to do something, Gwen. We've got to do something as a community. Well, we talked about the book, and it was, well, can we get in on that? What if other organizations were in on that? What if more people were reading this book? And then it started to grow. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And for the first time in talking about race during summer 2020, I was happy to talk about it because I felt like we were doing something. We are no longer in a place to just drive by and look at the car accident. We have to have the conversation about race in America. Some parts of it are very ugly and disturbing, but we have to own it or we'll never get past it. There's a reason they say that those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. It's exactly what happens. We find ourselves in this very strange place, this divisiveness, that most of us would say we don't recognize. We don't remember ever being so openly, harshly, violently divided. But here we sit, feeling, I would imagine, much like people felt in the 60s, so divided, so far away from one another that you wonder, can you bridge that gap? Can we walk back and start to talk about it in a way that sets us up for action? Because we've been talking too long. Talking hasn't gotten us where we need to be. And that's why I like this book so much, and its workbook, because it sets you up to talk, learn. It gives us all a common vocabulary around things like racism, discrimination, and then it tells you to move. Start doing different. And I'm inviting everyone to be part of our community book read. All you have to do is search for Common Read at UNI on Facebook, and you'll come to our page, or send an email to diversity@uni.edu, and we will send you the information. The Facebook page is fantastic. It's got lots of information on it. Everything from TED Talks to information for people who want to work or serve as facilitators for different groups. We want to see, wow, it would be amazing if there were hundreds of these small groups reading this book. I would imagine any group over 20 is too big. You're not able to really talk about the book if you get past 20. You can have a very effective book group at 3. And if you don't have a group of people to read the book with, that's what the Facebook page is for. All the groups will be listed there. And with a contact name, you can contact people and ask if you can join their group. You can read the book by yourself. The book is available at Barnes & Noble, at the new bookstore in downtown Waterloo. I think it's called Soul Corner. It is available at the UNI bookstore and, of course, on Amazon. But I'm always all about going to touch those pages. So go to an actual bookstore and get the book. The Facebook page is available for everyone out there. You write to diversity@uni.edu if you have specific questions that the Facebook page didn't answer for you. A lot of churches and organizations have already joined. I hate to start listing because I know I'll forget someone, but a few of the organizations that have joined us already include the YWCA, Waterloo Schools, Cedar Falls Schools, the Waterloo Human Rights Commission, Grow Cedar Valley, Hawkeye Community College, Wartburg College, Allen College, University of Northern Iowa, obviously. They've the Cedar Falls Faith Community, so the number of churches represented there, the Eastside Ministerial Alliance, and the churches that are represented there. And there are various groups in all of these organizations that I've named. So if you figure there's only 10 groups in each one of those organizations, we've already got about 100 groups out there committed to reading this book. And someone asked today, how will you know if this was effective? Well, it won't be fast, but some of those disparities ought to change. If we commit to being anti-racist, then some of the things that have grown because of racism, that's all there is. They've grown because of racism. Those things should get better.